The Supreme Court ruling on when ballots can be counted, states still grappling with budgets, public records being withheld, and leading tort reform states, plus so much more. Welcome to The States, powered by the Center Square. It's Monday, June 29th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop.
And we want no mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, and military deployment or travel. We'll be very judicious. Look what's happening in California, where the ballots still aren't in. They're still not. Can you believe it? They're going to go for weeks and weeks and weeks. And you know what they do? They cheat. How many votes do we need? How many votes? That's why they take their time. How many votes do we need? Okay, here they are. Honestly, it's terrible. We're a third world country with elections.
It was President Donald Trump not too long ago talking about mail-in ballots and just when can those ballots be counted. 14 states and the District of Columbia allow mail-in ballots to be received after Election Day. In Illinois, mail-in ballots can be received up to 14 days after Election Day. And after a ruling today from the U.S. Supreme Court, those states can continue to count ballots that are postmarked on Election Day well after the election has ended. The case Watson versus Republican National Committee came down to a 5-4 decision Monday in the U.S. Supreme Court. The case centered around Mississippi's acceptance of mail-in ballots up to 5 days after Election Day, as long as the ballots are postmarked by that day. Now, joining us to discuss the latest is the Center Square reporter, Andrew Rice. Andrew, thanks for taking time with the states here, and you've been watching the Supreme Court, and still a few more cases to be released, but today they released a pretty big one. Tell us about it.
Right, Greg. As you mentioned, there are lots more cases to come with the Supreme Court, but this today was a really big one. Watson versus Republican National Committee. It was challenging this late receipt for mail-in ballots that you mentioned happens in 14 states and the District of Columbia. We had a really close decision in this, a 5-4 decision, which is just barely enough for a majority that kept it in favor of allowing states like Mississippi and others across the country, for example, California, Illinois, New Jersey, Virginia, New York, and many more, for allowing mail-in ballots to be received after Election Day, as long as they are postmarked by the Election Day. Now, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she wrote in the court's majority opinion that the Constitution does not speak anywhere to requiring all of these ballots to be in by that federal election day. Just because there is this federal election day, which happens every the first Tuesday after that first Monday in November, that does not mean that these mail-in ballots have to be received by that point. They can be counted even days or weeks after that point. The other justices on the court, though, did really disagree with this. Justice Samuel Alito wrote, and Clarence Thomas, they wrote dissents in this decision, and were saying that the court's interpretation of federal election day flies in the face of federal election statutes, and allowing ballots to be counted after this significant, momentous day is completely wrong and should not be allowed under federal election statutes. But obviously they were overruled here.
Yeah, more than a dozen states counting ballots after Election Day. And this was litigated, of course, through the federal judiciary, going all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Was one of several very controversial cases that have been covered extensively at thecentersquare.com. But let's look at some of what the justices on each side of this had to say. Coney Barrett, as you said, Justice Amy Coney Barrett saying the federal election day statutes do not preempt Mississippi's law because the defining element of an election has always been the electorate's choice of candidates. She further said that the Constitution requires the day on which the electors shall give their votes to be the same throughout the United States, but says nothing about the day for receipt. Again, Andrew, you read this argument, but you've also listened to the oral arguments that were had on this particular case. What were those saying that counting beyond Election Day is not fair? What were they saying?
Well, right. I've covered this case really from the beginning, from when the court said they were going to take it up the end of last year. They heard arguments for this case back in March, and it was a little surprise. It was a little surprising to some, especially some election integrity advocates, that say this is not the decision we expected. It did seem, even from oral arguments back in March, that more of the justices were in favor of uh, of, of striking down some of these late mail-in ballot receipt deadlines. But that just goes to show that during these arguments, it's really hard to read the tea leaves in that sense. One argument that came from some people that were against the striking down of these late receipts was that that there are laws that allow military and overseas voters to have their ballots received after an election day. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she addressed those directly. So different states across the country, like the ones that we've mentioned, allow these overseas and military voters to have their ballots counted after that election day. And she said that is one of many exact reasonings for why the court made its majority decision today, that to prevent from discrimination and discrepancy between general categories of voters compared to other voters that are overseas or military, submitting military ballots.
And this doesn't necessarily deal with mail-in ballots. The question really is about, when can those mail-in ballots be counted? Is it only up to election day, or can it be up to 2 weeks, as is the case with Illinois? So I take it there's still going to be some head scratching. Well, what is the appropriate length? Is it 5 days after an election, or is it up to 14 days after an election? Didn't seem that was necessarily addressed. But as you stated, 5-4 decision, this is a split court. And Justice Samuel Alito saying this in the dissenting opinion: if ballots received after Election Day are added to the set of ballots that dictates the election's outcome, the electorate's choice does not occur on Election Day, and the federal Election Day statutes are violated. So you can kind of see the differing opinions there, and that's why we have the nation's high courts to deal with these controversial issues. Andrew, we heard the president earlier on, several weeks ago, complaining about mail-in ballots. He put out a statement on Truth Social, essentially calling this a tremendous loss in the U.S. Supreme Court concerning what he said were voters' rights, and the fact that people's votes are allowed to be counted long after an election's over. It is more important than ever to pass the Save America Act, which he says all voters must show photo ID, all voters must show proof of citizenship, and no mail-in ballots except illness, disability, military deployment, or travel. What other kinds of reaction are you seeing come in from this case today?
Well, exactly that. Like you said, Greg, President Trump is putting a lot of pressure on this for the Save America Act to be passed. And it is interesting and worth noting that this decision was still a narrow one. While it addressed this, Justice Amy Coney Barrett even said in her majority opinion that if Congress wants to make a change to the receipt of mail-in ballots, they can do it. And so it's going to be very interesting to follow further coverage of how the Save America Act continues through Congress. And it really does seem like many election integrity advocates are now pushing even further, if they weren't already pushing enough, that they're pushing further for the Save America Act to be passed. But then on the other side of the aisle, we are seeing a tremendous celebration for these and calling for other states to enact similar late mail-in ballot receipt deadlines. This is a trend that really began in earnest throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, of the late mail-in ballot receipt deadline, just due to different concerns over the administration of an election. And a lot of across the political aisle and a lot of other voting advocates are saying more states need to take this up.
Yeah, but it's the minority amount of states that count those mail-in ballots after Election Day. I know some states, they still allow mail-in ballots, and it's pretty open as to what you can get a mail-in ballot for, but it has to be received by Election Day in a lot lot of other states. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Congress handles this, especially with a little bit more clarity from the U.S. Supreme Court, which is kind of its role in a lot of these types of controversies. Andrew, several other cases released today. We don't have to go through all of these, but some of them dealt with the Trump administration's ability to fire people. What were some of the other cases that were released today?
Yes, those were some very interesting cases. We had, two cases about the Trump administration's ability to fire people. That's Trump versus Cook and Trump versus Slaughter. Trump versus Cook focused on President Trump attempting to fire Lisa Cook. She is a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. That's the central bank for the United States. It's interesting, in this Cook case, the justices said that Lisa Cook should stay on her role and that the president does not have the authority to fire members of the central bank, citing the long storied history of the Federal Reserve as America's independent central bank. Chief Justice John Roberts even said in his opinion, cited the central bank's role during the American Revolution, or Revolutionary War, used to fund fighting forces against the British. So very timely as we're getting ready to celebrate 4th of July there. But then on the opposite end, we saw Trump versus Slaughter, a case where President Trump attempted to fire two Democratic appointed members of the Federal Trade Commission. And the Supreme Court said that President Trump had all the authority to do something like that for the FTC. That overruled a significant precedent going back to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and showed that executive agencies and executive boards like the Federal Trade Commission are under the president's purview. He can hire and fire at will. So that brings up a really interesting dynamic for how these executive agencies and boards will move forward in the future, and really highlights how an expanded amount of presidential authority for some boards, but limited in others, that won't just affect the remainder of President Trump's term, but future presidents moving forward.
And still some cases to be released from the U.S. Supreme Court, so be sure to get up to date with the very latest at thecentersquare.com. Thanks so much to Andrew for taking time with us. A couple other cases that were announced today include issues around warrantless wiretapping. You've got the new Civil Liberties Alliance announcing the court correctly recognizing the government's sweeping warrantless, suspicionless, and probable causeless collection of individuals' location history constitutes a Fourth Amendment search. Regardless of what that search actually turns up, the court's ruling, welcomed by civil libertarians as an affirmation that Carpenter v. United States was not an outlier, but a watershed decision. And so much more that you can find and stay up to date at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States. $3.2 trillion. That's trillion with a T. That's how much the states are expected to spend on your tax dollars in the most recent fiscal year for state government operations. The National Association of State Budget Officers reports out that some states still sorting out how to spend your money for the coming fiscal year. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Now, state budget situations, they can shift rapidly in late June and early July. That's because several states still have yet to button things up heading into that new fiscal year and how they're going to spend your tax dollars. Some are way late on approving spending plans. Now, roughly half of the United States has enacted fiscal year 27 budgets, but others are in the process of finalizing those budgets, either operating on continued resolutions and the prior year funding authority, or they're actually heading into late action or special sessions around that July 1st start for the new fiscal year for most states. Some states do a budget every year. Other states do a budget every other year. It encompasses 2 full years. But most of the country, 46 states, they begin their fiscal year 27 budgets July 1st. So that's coming up in just a couple of days. Texas is an outlier. They begin their budget September 1st. Alabama and Michigan, they begin their budgets October 1st. 27 states so far, so more than half the country already enacting those budgets, including many that have passed their biannual budgets. Now, which states are spending the most of your tax dollars? Something you have to consider in the ongoing reporting of state budgets is they don't just spend state taxpayer dollars. They also spend a substantial amount of federal taxpayer dollars that is passed through state agencies to go to certain types of spending priorities. Now, California clearly has the largest state budget. They're looking at $452 billion in just state funds and general revenue funds. Now, how much is coming from the federal government? Well, about $149 billion. So that means state funds and state taxpayers footing $298 billion. That's just from the most recent fiscal year. Now, California, again, their total spending, $452 billion. Legislators, they are set to take a final budget vote sometime today or tomorrow because that budget year is set to begin. State Senator David Tangipa, he talked about the state's spending and some looking to go further into debt to focus on certain types of priorities. Here he is.
And I too rise in opposition to this bill, mainly because, as I have continuously beat this drum, we have a record budget and record revenue. Why do we need to borrow money? If we wanted to appropriate money right now to take care of our veterans, to make affordable housing, you would do so in a record budget.
New York, another state with large dollar numbers of your tax money being spent, $234 billion. Of that total taxpayer spend, $134 billion is coming from state funds, $94 billion coming from federal taxpayers to New York coffers. Texas also has a pretty large spending plan, $144 billion, $93 billion of that coming from state taxpayers in Texas, but federal taxpayers giving Texas $50 billion for their state appropriations. Florida, another big spender, $130 billion, $81 billion from Florida state taxpayers, and the federal government's taxpayers spending $46 billion in Florida. Illinois, another big budget with $139 billion total spent. And that's state taxpayer funds, about $112 billion, and federal taxpayer funds, about $24 billion. Pennsylvania spent $119 billion in fiscal year 24. The state's been tardy on passing a budget on time. It's actually happened the last 3 years that they've been late in approving a budget. When they don't approve a budget, states typically go into just continuing resolutions to spend at previous year's levels until they find some kind of resolution to continue forward with a new budget plan. But in Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro, in his most recent proposal, wants to increase spending on K-12 schools by more than $500 million. And that's a debate that is expected to continue. But in the last 3 years, the state has funneled $1 billion through a new funding formula. But there are other considerations. In the state Senate last week, Pennsylvania legislators tackled reversing tax breaks for data centers for what's expected to have a sizable impact on Pennsylvania's state budget.
By eliminating this exemption, it will allow the Commonwealth to offset, in this particular case, the revenue losses that we will be examining here later today as it relates to the underlying bill, which talks about the gross receipts tax on electricity bills. Estimated revenues to the Commonwealth by eliminating the sales and use tax exemption for data centers would go from $168 million this fiscal year, 26-27, rise to $517 million in 2030 and 2031.
Again, last year in Pennsylvania, state leaders missed the deadline by 135 days. And as a result, billions of tax dollars and state payments were held. Numerous employees were furloughed, and counties lost millions of dollars. But the House and Senate are scheduled to return to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for voting session today. The Center Square team reporting on Pennsylvania reports both the House and Senate, they scaled back their voting day schedules between Thursday and tomorrow, the final day of the fiscal year, and the deadline to produce a new state budget. Elsewhere in the country, in Virginia, they spent a total $84 billion in fiscal year 2024. How much is coming from the feds? $23.4 billion. Now, Governor Abigail Spanberger, she recently proposed 14 amendments to Virginia's budget, including amendments impacting home care worker raises, new data center water requirements, firefighter cancer screening funding, and a one-year delay of one firearm provision. You can read the latest from Virginia with the Center Square reporter Charlene Guerrera's reports at thecentersquare.com. And in Michigan, which spent $85.9 billion in fiscal year 2024, $33 billion coming from federal taxpayers, their deadline nears for a new spending plan. Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, she discussed different types of budget priorities she says are meant to protect Michiganders from the Trump administration.
Protecting our rights and lowering costs are not only both possible, but essential. Your government works for you. Your tax dollars are yours. And the right to vote is not a bargaining chip. It is not something that a president gets to dangle over your head until you give him what he wants. The people of Michigan are not pawns in this game. They are taxpayers.
Now, Elise Apel, the Center Square reporter, she'll have an update out of Michigan, so be sure to get the latest at thecentersquare.com. And in North Carolina, the state was operating under automatic continuation of prior funding levels. The Center Square managing editor Alan Wooten reporting General Assembly leaders meeting to discuss the budget for the coming week after most all other lawmakers retreated for home over the weekend and voting was done. North Carolina's two-year spending plan is to be enacted July 1st of last year, and it remains elusive amid squabbling about what are the priorities. By states with the largest share of their budgets coming from federal taxpayers, Louisiana gets nearly 50% of its spending plan from federal taxpayers. Mississippi gets about 45% of its budget from federal taxpayers. And on the other end of the spectrum, Wyoming and Illinois, they get the lowest amount of federal funds in the percentage of their spending plan at about 18%. A lot of this money is going to fund things like Medicaid, K through 12 education, higher education, transportation, corrections, and so much more. Total spending overall from your tax dollars for state governments, 5.2% up in 2024 and up 5.7% in 2025. We'll be right back with more from the states. Colorado's leading candidate for governor has delayed the release of public records that would reveal how much taxpayers have spent to file lawsuits against the Trump administration until after tomorrow's primary. Welcome back to the States. The Center Square investigative reporter Adam Herbets joins us to discuss his story further. Adam, thanks for taking time with us today. So who is it that's up for election tomorrow in California, and why are they withholding public records until after tomorrow's vote?
Yeah, so we're talking about Colorado in this story. The Colorado Attorney General, Phil Weiser, running up against Michael Bennet. in the Democratic primary. Most people say whoever wins this Democratic primary in a blue state like Colorado is going to move on and become governor. And the way people describe this race is who hates Trump the most. And when we look at Phil Weiser and his conduct as Colorado Attorney General, he's joined a lot of these lawsuits against the Trump administration, particularly after he started to run for governor. He joined some of them during his first term. He didn't do it nearly as much as he does it now. It's a central part of his campaign. And when we ask basic questions like how much is it costing taxpayers, we get hit with, well, we'll tell you, we'll give you the records, but we're going to put it behind this paywall. We're not going to tell you how we calculated the price tag on transparency, and we're not even going to let you pay. So when we try and even pay these, what we think are high fees, they won't even let us. So here we are.
Let's jump into this a little bit here because it's fascinating that it's somewhat expensive for independent journalists or even just taxpayers in general that might want to access these numbers because it's their money paying for legal counsel outside of state government, paying to file these lawsuits against 66 different lawsuits. After the first year of the Trump administration, all of these different attorneys general from across the country all heralded that they sued the president, 50 plus times, at least one lawsuit per week in the first year of the Trump administration. But you did request, you said, hey, give me some records. I want to see the full list of lawsuits. And I also want to see how much outside counsel's being paid. How much did they say that the full list was going to cost the Center Square, and how much the list of outside counsel and how much they were being paid was going to cost?
It's funny because you said that number, 66 lawsuits. We don't know what the real number is because we were told that list was not comprehensive. So it's at least 66. Maybe it's 67, maybe it's 68. We don't know because they're putting that behind a $300-something paywall. We'll give you the records if you give us $300+. And then for those outside counsel payments, these outside firms that are doing work on behalf of the state of Colorado or perhaps other states, then, we don't even know what that price tag is going to look like because those records are being kept behind a $289.59 paywall. So we've said, all right, let's pay the $289.59. We'll give you the money. Send us the link so we can pay. This was like a month and a half, 2 months ago, way before the primary. And they wouldn't let us pay. They still won't let us pay. They said, well, we'll start working on the records now, even though they really legally have 3 days to do that. It's been almost 2 months. They're starting to work on it now. They're asking for an extension, but you as voters can decide whether you think it's appropriate to ask for an extension 2 months after the fact, right before the primary.
They have to have these records, and I'm not sure as to what the opposition to it may be. They're not like revealing any kind of legal strategy. You're just looking for how much did you pay this outside law firm.
Exactly. It's billing statements, it's invoices, it's receipts. This is pretty basic stuff. So to say that we can't fulfill the request right now because it would impede our ability to govern, well, did it impede your ability a month and a half ago, 2 months ago when we first asked? Because we think, look, this isn't about us as reporters trying to do story. It doesn't matter. I mean, no offense, but it doesn't matter what you and I think. It matters what the voters think, what the citizens of Colorado think, so they can make an informed decision when they go to the polls, so they can know what their money is going toward with all these lawsuits. One of the people we interviewed said these might be the best lawsuits in the world. Maybe they're amazing. They're doing everything they can to protect Colorado. But at the end of the day, they have a right to know. And if this is going to be the central point of your campaign, you'd think you'd want to be able to talk about it.
And again, Weiser being the attorney general, running for governor, it seems that transparency would be an interesting focal point for voters there. But you did talk to the CEO and president of the Independence Institute in Denver. Here's what he had to tell you.
It is the nature of government and those in power to keep their cards close to their vest and not have those nasty citizens and those icky reporters asking them for governmental documents. The winner of the primary into this will likely be the next governor. And both Phil Weiser and Senator Michael Bennet are in a race to see who can claim to be battling Trump the most for Colorado. It sure seems like, well, that's nice. What's it costing me for you to sue Trump all the time? For me, the question is that of simple transparency, our right to know what's going on in the AG's office and how much of our money and how much of our people's staff time is he spending on these suits against Donald Trump. Maybe they are spectacular suits. Maybe they're worth every penny. Maybe when people find out how much of our money is being spent, they will hail him as a great investor of our interests and our time and our treasure. But we have a right to know. And for him to say, I'm not going to tell you until after the primary is basically saying, I'm not going to tell you until after I'm elected governor.
Pretty fascinating conversation I'm sure you had with Mr. Caldera, but you also talked with Anthony Reid. Tell us about his story.
So Anthony Reid is not a journalist. He's not somebody who requests public records for a living, but he has just as much right to open government as you or me. And he was so frustrated with his pursuit for basic records, police, law enforcement, transparency records, that he created a fake name to start requesting records just to see if that would help speed along the process. So Anthony Reid became Samuel Newton. And when he started requesting records under the fake name Samuel Newton, he was still getting pushback. He wanted to see complaints against law enforcement officers. In some cases, he wanted to see copies of his own complaints against law enforcement officers because he knew that he was filing them and he wanted to see what, if anything, was being done about it. The reason we bring up Anthony Reid is he was being given many of the same excuses as the center square. So when we ask for, hey, how'd you calculate this price tag? Or, hey, when are you going to give us the records? Or just asking basic questions about open government. He was told the same thing we were told, which was, hold on, slow down. We can't give you legal advice. We can't answer your questions. We're just the Attorney General's office. We can't provide legal advice. Now, obviously, we're not looking for legal advice. And he said the same thing. I'm not looking for legal advice. I'm asking basic questions about government records so that you can fulfill my request. And it seems to be this line that they use. And according to him, he's getting the same line from other Colorado government agencies as well. It led us to kind of research the state laws across all 50 states to see which states are allowed to treat you essentially like an adversary, like you're their opponent in court instead of cooperatively. States like California or Washington, they're legally required to work with you in good faith to access your records, public records. Colorado, they don't have anything like that written into the law. And that's how you run into examples like this, where they say, slow down. We can't give you legal advice. We're not going to answer your questions. Not going to give you a time estimate. Not going to tell you how we calculated these fees. And here we sit one day before the primary, and it shows you why it matters.
So what is Weiser's opponent saying in tomorrow's Democratic primary? Is this an issue at all to them, or is it kind of, as you and the other source you spoke with mentioned, this is really just about who can heap the most criticism of Trump?
Somewhere in the middle is, I guess, the best way to answer your question. So his campaign has put out a press release kind of questioning the lawsuits, essentially painting the lawsuits as a campaign stunt. At one point, he said, we can't sue our way to better government. But at the same time, when we asked directly the campaign to comment on this, we haven't gotten anything yet. Now, this is a Democratic primary where Weiser, according to the latest polls, is a pretty firm lead. So is this a situation where Bennett doesn't want to make too many waves, knowing that he might lose, doesn't want to, sling too much mud on another fellow Democrat? We don't know. I don't want to speculate one way or the other on that, but I will say his campaign has been not as strong as some people would expect, given his name recognition, given his war chest. I was looking at his website earlier today. It looks like his campaign website hasn't posted anything in the last 5-6 days. So we're one day before the primary, hasn't posted anything yet today. So don't know. He's talked about the lawsuits, but not directly on this story.
Well, looking forward to seeing what kinds of records you can produce, because it's not just something Colorado's been doing, going after the Trump administration. States across the country using their attorneys general, your taxpayer funds behind that, to challenge the Trump administration. As as Adam highlighted, at least 66 times out of Colorado. If
Well,
not
and Greg,
more
I'll say this:
elsewhere.
no matter whether he wins the primary tomorrow, whether he stays Attorney General through the end of his term, we're going to report on this either way, because whether he's running for governor or not really doesn't matter. It's taxpayer money that has already been spent. We're going to do the story. The question is not if, just when. How slow are they going to be in responding? And what are they going to give us? We'll see.
Adam Herbets, greatly appreciate your time here for the Center Square. Get his and other team reports at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back. Texas and Florida leading in tort reform, bringing more business and economic growth to the southern boom belt states. It's according to the Texas Conservative Coalition Research Institute and the James Madison Institute. TCCRI was founded in 1996 by a group of state leaders determined to implement conservative public policies in state government based on the principles of limited government, individual liberty, free enterprise, and traditional values. Florida-based JMI is dedicated to the ideals of limited government, economic freedom, federalism, and individual liberty, coupled with individual responsibility. The Center Square contributor Bethany Blankley reports their new joint report argues that Texas and Florida's economic dominance is the direct result of a multi-decade effort to create a predictable civil justice environment. Now, these reforms spurred the business investment, population growth, and capital inflows that defined the boom belt. They also argue that the competitive edge is under threat by trial lawyer organizations. In Florida, the Florida Justice Association targeting pro-business politicians to unseat in-state legislative races, according to the JMI. In Texas, plaintiff-aligned groups are funding candidates and political action committees to weaken reforms the state legislature has implemented in Texas. Now, Texas and Florida, as they continue to enjoy that period of unprecedented economic growth, according to these organizations, you've got different things happening across the country when it comes to tort law. And what is tort reform? Well, essentially, tort reform, it's about proposed changes to the civil justice system, looking at limited liability and restricting the ability of personal injury lawsuits and different types of litigation that can really increase business costs in any state where it's more litigious. It can also tie up courts. The more litigious a state is, those are taxpayer-funded courts dealing with controversial issues above and beyond personal injury and so on. But Texas and Florida leading what the groups are calling the boom belt states. They argue the boom belt states include Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. But to demonstrate how different states take on the issue of tort reform, California recently discussed this with Assembly member Lori Wilson last month, raising some concern about opening up litigation too much to allow for private rights of action. That's an individual suing a company in court for various reasons. Here she is.
And last but not least, I support civil action that you have in the bill by the Attorney General, City Attorney, County Council. But for the individual consumer, even though it's no longer monetary damages, but injunctive relief, I still think is an issue. I mean, when we think about litigation risk and this particular part of the private right of action, remember every time you go into a court case, involved in a court case, that is costly. And so every business or retailer that is spending their time battling courts are spending resources, which drives the cost up for everyone.
measure ended up passing 29-9. It's a different story down in Louisiana last month with a state senator saying that litigation should be based on common sense, not based off of controversial policy debates.
Louisiana needs reliable and affordable energy to power our farms, our homes, our businesses, and our future. Farmers who rely on petroleum-based fuels, fertilizers, and equipment, and the landowners who benefit from the responsible energy development on the property deserve certainty that they won't be dragged into novel coastal global climate litigation over lawful emissions. The bill simply says the claims seeking damages for climate change or its alleged effects from greenhouse gas emissions should not be litigated in our state courts. It does not prevent anyone from suing for violations of actual permits enforcement under the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. Those strong federal and state laws already exist precisely for companies or individuals who exceed their permitted emission. This bill simply keeps our courts focused on real, provable violations instead of worldwide policy debates.
So while different states look to make their states less litigious, other states seeming to open up the possibility for private rights of action against corporations or businesses, and it's impacting the economic outcomes in those states, according to these certain individual organizations researching this issue. We'll be right back with more from the states. All right, welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or at thecentersquare.com. The Los Angeles Unified School District Board has named a former kindergarten teacher and principal as permanent superintendent and approved its latest budget. What happened to the previous superintendent? The Center Square education reporter Esther Wickham has more.
After federal agents raided former Los Angeles Unified School District Superintendent Alberto Carvalho's home a few months back, he has officially resigned from his position. After months of federal investigations that have been undisclosed by the FBI, Alberto Carvalho, who had been on paid leave since February, announced his resignation effective June 21st, saying he wanted schools to remain focused on students without distractions. Now, Carvalho has led the second largest school district in the country since 2022, with a focus on rebuilding and reshaping the school system since the impact of COVID in 2020. Parent advocacy groups and education watchdogs welcomed the move, citing concerns over district spending, declining student achievement, and leadership turnover. Critics pointed to the district's failed $6 million chatbot project and ongoing administrative controversies. The district said it remains committed to stability and student achievement, while acting superintendent will continue leading LAUSD until a permanent replacement is selected.
Meanwhile, Democratic New York Governor Kathy Hochul has rolled out a $30 million tariff relief program aimed at helping the state's farmers deal with the impact of higher prices. Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports the new Agricultural Reliance Against Tariffs program, unveiled Monday, will allow farmers to request up to submitting applications of $25,000 in relief from the state as part of a $30 million aid effort aimed at easing the hit to farmers from the federal government's tariff policies. Also, you'll find at thecentersquare.com, U.S. Representative Julie Letlow won Louisiana's Republican nomination for U.S. Senate Saturday, defeating State Treasurer John Fleming in a runoff that became a test of President Donald Trump's influence over the Louisiana State GOP. The Center Square Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry reports Letlow will face Democrats Jamie Davis, a Northeast Louisiana farmer, in the November general election for the seat now held by Senator Bill Cassidy. And finally, you'll be able to find this story at thecentersquare.com. Alligator Alcatraz closing after being in operation for just 1 year. The governor in Florida confirming that. Center Square contributor Marilee Gasser reports the immigration detention center located in the Everglades began accepting detainees in July of 25 after an 8-day construction process. It aided in close to 30,000 additional deportations, according to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And that's just some of what America's talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You could join us back here Tuesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the states. Powered by the Center Square.